Welcome to Season 2 of the NAPABA Coffee House, brought to you by our generous sponsors. I'm Priya Purandare, and I'm the Executive Director of NAPABA. This season, NAPABA Coffee House Conversations focus on how AA and HPI leaders, especially women, have reached positions of prominence across various industries and their paths to power. This season is hosted by legal legend and trailblazer Deborah Wong Yang. If you're like me and have been as excited for the success of movies such as Crazy Rich Asians, Shang-Chi, and Everything Everywhere All at Once, then get your popcorn out for this edition of the NAPABA Coffee House. On today's episode, Deb welcomes Jeremy Tran, Executive Director, COO, and co-founder of Gold House, and Rose Yan, Gold House Vice President of Marketing. Deb has aptly christened this episode as Mastering the Multiverse, not only in a nod to her own love of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but for the breadth of cultural and social impact that our guests are hoping to achieve through the Gold House venture. For those who don't know, Gold House is a cultural ecosystem that unites, invests in, and champions the AA and HPI creators and companies to empower tomorrow for all. We'll hear more about what that means in the podcast. How did these two young lawyers make the journey from Big Law to the Gold House? Coming up is a fascinating discussion about shifting the paradigm from a scarcity mentality to an abundance mentality. The conversation resonates as a way to think about how we move forward as a community. Sit down, grab a cup of coffee to listen to the perfect blend of Jeremy and Rose as they take Deb through the journey of Gold House.
Jeremy and Rose, welcome. I'm so excited to have you guys here today. As you guys already know, this season, NAPABA is doing a coffee house podcast, and it essentially is all about exploring how members of the AAPI community have really risen to positions of power, but in various industries. And what we're really trying to focus on is how Asian American women, in particular, can do so, and how, what that path looks like, and some of the ground that we still need to cover. It's fantastic, and I'm personally so excited to have you guys here today. But it's great to have you representing Gold House, because Gold House has truly changed the game when it comes to empowerment of AAPI folks. And, I think both of you guys are the true definition of what we call disruptors, because you guys, have done something different. You've broken out of the mold, and you've been successful at it in a relatively short period of time. So it's fantastic, and we want to learn from your guys' stories. I'm actually calling this episode Mastering the Multiverse, but both because Gold House embraces so many different facets of this mission to empower AAPI voices, both across industries, across different Asian American cultures, bringing all of that, the beauty of all of that to the forefront. And because both of you guys have leveraged your backgrounds in the law to pursue this cause, and because I happen to be a huge Marvel fan. So there you go. So I can't wait to get into it. So let's start. Let's start with Gold House and the very beginning. I want to hear the original story, because a lot of our listeners don't know that. So Jeremy, you and Bing, I'll call you guys the Energizer Bunnies, right? Because you're all over the world at every single event, literally all over my Instagram. So you're everywhere. But you guys co-founded Gold Coast, and now they're heading into its 5th year. And how did it start? How did you guys come together? Where did that idea come from? And then maybe just quickly tell our listeners, what the idea is, because I've seen it in different iterations. I don't even know that I know the full sort of picture of what you guys were envisioning.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you for inviting Rose and me to this wonderful podcast. We're so excited to be here and so good to see you. I'm happy to share a little more about our origin story and just to piggyback on what you said a little bit earlier about the multiverse. That's music to Bing's ears. I'll tell you right now. I think that's something we strive to do, to have influence in many different industries and many different communities. So we appreciate that compliment. So Gold House started in 2018, and really, I would say, came from Bing's brilliance in his mind, where we looked at a lot of our brothers and sisters and friends in other communities and envied the way that they were able to really come together and support each other. Whether it's a film like Black Panther that came out and the Black community was able to rally behind that, regardless of whether they were working in Hollywood, they knew the importance of that film. So we were curious about what it is that we were missing, the Asian Pacific community, and how we can surmount those obstacles. And we quickly realized we are, a diaspora of 4 or 5 billion people worldwide now. And in the United States, we have dozens of ethnicities, dozens of languages, and different experiences as to how our families came to the United States, right? And it's different being a fourth generation Japanese American from being a first generation Vietnamese American, for example. So there were a lot of dissimilarities, but most importantly, we quickly realized there was also a lot of things that we could rally behind, and a lot of causes that we all understood that we needed to galvanize our community to focus on. So that was really the genesis of it. How do we bring our community together, and how do we find those common causes that can bridge all of our disparate communities to support? And we decided to start in media representation. So that was twofold. One, I would say opportunistic, because a small film called Crazy Rich Asians was coming out, and it really provided us an opportunity, a concrete opportunity we could point to and give people something to work towards. And then secondly, it was because we all understood what it felt not to be seen, right? Even if you are a partner at a law firm, or if you are a young associate at a tech firm, you understood what it felt not to be seen on screen, and we're all consumers of media. So it provided a cause that, regardless of how your family came to the United States, you understood the importance of trying to tackle it. So we utilized Crazy Rich Asians in many ways as a way to bring the community together. And we hosted different dinners and events and brought our leaders, our network of leaders from various industries in a room who may not have had the opportunity to interact with each other on a common basis. And we said, look, Crazy Rich Asians, a film like this hasn't been out in over 2 decades. Backed by a major studio, and we know that the success of this film will have ripple effects and impact beyond Hollywood. So how can we as a community come together and ensure its success in the box office and beyond? So everyone started to brainstorm around their resources, their platforms, whether they're able to buy out a theater and donate it back to the community, whether they are able to use their social media influence, their access to headlines and magazine covers, whatever resources and platforms we had, we came together and said, let's do what we can to make sure this film will succeed. And it became the highest grossing rom-com in over a decade. I think it still is, and obviously broke many, many records, and greenlit a lot of other stories down the line. So that's how it started. And we weren't thinking of, creating this giant community and everything that's come to us now, but really where it started was, how do we bring people together?
Yeah, I think it's so fantastic because you guys really, with what you did with Crazy Rich Asians, and really sort of getting out to the masses who really wanted to support it in a marketing way. And Rose, I'm going to turn to you in a second, but in a marketing way that was very different than what had happened before with traditional studio work, right? And now it's sort of a, I don't want to say a template, but it's like a path to platform, right? That you guys have created, and see that and understand that. I saw some of the stuff that you guys did with Joyride and other films. And it really, and I think those of us in the AAPI community at large, right, see that now and want to be so supportive, because it's actually given us a portal and a way to sort of support that financially, because I don't think anybody out in the public really understood how Hollywood measures the metrics and what that means and all the repercussions that come from that. But Rose, if you could just touch on that for a second, because, you guys are doing so many other kinds of things and, sort of using that to really sort of get out to different markets and creating different paths that haven't been created before. Can you just talk a little bit about some of that and some of what Gold House is doing in that regard? Because you guys are really, I love it. I absolutely love it. You guys are creating, and you guys are so brilliant about it, but you guys are creating different ways to go about it that honestly, for me, somebody who's been, involved in the community for decades, you're answering things I've been saying for the longest time as far as what we need, here on the legal side of it to affect change. I've always said we need to change our image because that's the way the rest of America perceives us. So you guys are right at the point of that. And so I want to hear about some of the things that you're doing and some of the things you're thinking about, Rose, in that regard.
Yeah. So we think a lot about how to distill some of these narratives and how to really cut through a lot of the noise and show our community what they should be rallying around. And we do that through, thinking through what are these new vehicles that we can create to really rally everyone who wants to help. Like you said, everyone says, I have dollars to spend, I have time to give, I have, these resources, but I don't know how to deploy them. And so what we do is we come up with those vehicles for deployment, right? And so one of those is the Gold Open movement, which Jeremy touched on, which has been really successful around movies like Crazy Rich Asian, but also Parasite, Minari, some of these really, movies that people wouldn't have heard about. And it was really the strength of our community coming together behind these movies that got them to the Oscars. And of course, Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is, one big movie we worked on. But we also do things like the A100 list, right? And so that is our version of the Time 100. And the real goal of that is to distill for the mainstream public all of the really amazing people who are driving change behind industries. When Bing and Jeremy first started the list, people asked, are there even 100 Asian leaders to put on the list, right? Which is, and the answer is of course, yes, but how can we really identify that for the people? And now we just did our fifth year of the list. It's grown to be this really big mainstream thing now. We now have this Gold Gala every year, which is a tentpole event that celebrates the A100 and those Asian Pacific leaders. So we really think about what does the public need to understand what's important to our community? What does the public need to understand the stories that a community want to tell? And what does our community need to really come together to stand behind those stories?
Wow, that's fantastic. It can't have been easy in the early stages, and I really want to encourage others who are thinking about this or, that you have to push through, right? And sort of persevere and figure out how to do that. Bing, can you just tell us a little bit about maybe some of the early challenges that you had, with Gold House, and maybe give an example of how you guys actually pushed through that, or, because I don't like people to think it's just such an easy path. It's so easy as AAPIs to look at the successful product at the end and ignore all the the hard work and the sweating along the way. But I think that's a realistic part of it. And I want people to be really comfortable with that.
Yeah, Deb, I think what you said is exactly right. It was not easy, but it's extremely rewarding. And I'll say the biggest piece of advice I always give, and I think the in many ways the secret sauce to how we've been able to create all the change we have in just about 5 years, is when we have these conversations with our partners, we frame it as a mutually beneficial proposal, partnership, right? So going into a studio executive, meeting with a studio executive, for example, and explaining to them the economic opportunities of investing in a film like Crazy Rich Asians, in a film like Parasite, Minari, Everything Everywhere All at Once, Shang-Chi, for example, and explaining to them that this is what the majority of the world looks like now. This is what the majority of the world wants to consume in terms of the media, where they will spend their dollars and their time. So if you are not going to think intentionally, thoughtfully, how to invest in that community, you're missing out on a huge economic opportunity. So positioning it as a collaboration, and not just diversity for diversity's sake, and that it will hit their bottom line, is the way to go about it, I think, where everyone suddenly perks up and says, yes, I will listen, I will think about this intentionally, and I will put the resources behind it, because that's what our business, frankly, needs to do. So that's been really successful for us, I would say, and trying to break through, not only in Hollywood, but across the board in all the industries we do touch, and explaining to them that, this is a collaborative process, and it's not just for the good of diversity, but actually hits their bottom line.
Yeah, one thing that occurs to me is that you guys have really done a tremendous job at bringing all the different voices of the Asian population together in a really sort of democratic and fair and representative kind of way. And, to use for an example, like in the legal profession, which I know you guys both, have, are familiar with, there's all different kinds of subgroups, right? So we do have the big NAPABA, we have, other kinds of broader groups, but then there's also like, the Taiwanese group, the Kaba, Java. And so there's a lot of, at least in the past, there'd been a lot of breakdown into like separate, ethnicity, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
But I find that, in the United States, and I'm old enough where I actually helped start NAPABA with many others. So I remember the conversations that went on, but really, I find that I honestly get a tear in my eye every time I go to NAPABA conferences to see everybody together, because it's that sum total of people and that the breadth of what that brings, right? But you had to do it in a very visible kind of way, because you're in the media, you're being viewed and watched, and and very present in that sense. How did you guys deal with that? I mean, and what was your approach to that? Because I love what's been happening from that.
Yeah, it's not easy, Deb, and we're not perfect at it. There's a lot of learning on our end as well. The way we think about it, I would say, is that we'd like to be a unifying place and space, and platform for all of the different communities who want to come together, right? I think, as I mentioned earlier, there are dozens of ethnicities, and being a Pacifica person is very different from being like a Vietnamese American again. So like, how do we create the space where people feel comfortable to come to celebrate those unique experiences, but at the same time come and support each other, and the projects, the campaigns, the activities that each of those individual communities has. So it's been a overall, I would say, very warm and excited response to that, and that people want to come and support each other and still have the platform to talk about their unique experiences, but realize that there are a lot of more similarities that we can lean on to come together to support.
That's great. And Rose, I want to know, like, there's lots of different buckets that Gold House has gotten into. There's the media piece of it, but I know there's there's A100 piece, but there's also like Gold Ventures, I think is what it's called, and
Yep.
things like that. Can you talk about some of the other sort of vehicles that you guys have sort of derived and what you're doing with that? I'm really curious to see sort of the spans of what's been going on with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one other really important arm of what we do, in addition to the entertainment media space, is our arm that is seeking to accelerate success for this generation, and really to convene the power, resources, influence of this generation of leaders and help to deploy that to the next generation of leaders. And so to that end, we did launch our own venture capital fund called Gold House Ventures last year. And if you look at the cap table, it's a who's who list of all industry leaders. And that's really exciting, because that means that there's a lot of energy around nurturing and actually investing hard capital in the next generation of entrepreneurs as well. And we really looked at entrepreneurs as a fast track to breaking, what we call the bamboo ceiling or the gold glass ceiling, right? Because they are in charge of their own companies. They're in charge of who's in the leadership team, who's on the board. And so from a very early stage, they're already building that culture of diverse leadership that we see trickle down to all aspects of the company. So that's something that we're really interested in. And, we don't just focus on the business leaders. We also have a lot of programs for rising creatives, because, that's also really important is, we see the success and the renaissance now, but in order to have longevity, we need to have a really strong pipeline. And so we partner with global companies like Netflix, Spotify, who are themselves interested in making sure there's this pipeline coming through. And so we have creative accelerators for film directors, for producers, for music artists, for contemporary artists, and we're working on one in fashion. And so really every industry that touches culture, we really want to have a program to help make sure that there are more of us who are leading the future.
That's fantastic. And is the fund focused on is mostly creative ventures in that sense?
We have two separate funds. So one fund, the Gold House Ventures Fund, is invests solely in Asian Pacific entrepreneurs. And so those are, we're looking at CPG, we're looking at SaaS, B2B companies there. And then we have a separate creative equity fund, and that's that fund is investing in the creatives.
Okay, I've got it. That's fantastic. Yeah, and it'll be really, really exciting to see what comes out of that. And I don't know how you guys came up with that, but it's an amazing idea, because you're capturing, really people in early stage, and giving them a quick boost to sort of get to market or get whatever the product is out. And I think that can be really impactful in a community that hasn't had that kind of opportunity before, because it's not like it's easy for them to get access to major VC fund resourcing, right? There isn't, that path just hasn't been laid. And yet on the other hand, a lot of these VCs have a tremendous amount of money to invest, and so I'm excited to see what's going to come from that. I sort of have a vision of all those molecules just like charging together here, in a multiverse kind of way. All right, so let's go back a little bit, because I know people are going to want to know a little bit about your background, right? And Jeremy, before you were at Gold House, you were an attorney at O'Melveny and Myers, and both of you came from, spectacular law firms and had really quite distinguished legal careers for young lawyers, right? But, you at some point, and I know you were doing entertainment law, right? So you already had a little bit of familiarity, but going from that to what you're doing is a pretty big step. And I'm just curious, like, how you did that, what was going through your head, how you actually utter the words, "I'm leaving," to go do XYZ, where does that bravery come from? And Rose, I'm going to ask you the same thing afterwards, because we still miss you here at Gibson. You have many friends here, and Cynthia included, who was so excited, that you were going to do this. But I think that, I know what it's like. It's not easy to step away from that, because you're sort of at the height of the legal market, and it's what your training has brought. So there's something inside of you, and I want to know what that spark was and what caused you to make that jump. So Jeremy, maybe you want to go first?
Sure. And I'll start off by saying I really loved everyone at O'Melveny. I am so thankful for the training, the relationships, mentorship, and the lifelong friendships I have with everyone there. So I'll start with that, just to make sure if there's anyone listening, I'm not telling you to leave the firm. I'm just happy to share my specific journey and story behind that. So I left law school not really knowing exactly what I wanted to do, but again, fell in love with everyone I met at O'Melveny when I was a summer associate. And I worked in the Century City office, and kind of stumbled into the entertainment litigation field because of that. I had the luxury, I guess, the privilege of being able to work on some really big trials my time at O'Melveny. I started as a first-year associate, jumped on the Michael Jackson wrongful death trial, went on to some SiriusXM trials, and then finally did my last trial there with AT&T Time Warner merger trial against the Department of Justice. And so thankful for those experiences. And I think I walked away very professionally fulfilled. But at the back of my mind, I always had this passion, this curiosity about how I can best serve my community and people who shared experiences similar to me growing up to get to where I was. So I've always done those, things like NAPABA and O'Melveny specific diversity committees, and I was sent to many conferences to represent O'Melveny, for example. But it was always a side passion. So after my last trial, the AT&T Time Warner merger one, I was not brave enough, Deb, to break up with the firm, but I asked for a break. So I went on a break to kind of recenter myself. Anyone who's been on a trial, I think you understand why you need a little bit of a break after a trial.
And plus the trials that you did, those are phenomenally large and high pressure trials. So yes.
Yes. And long. They took a year plus for each one. So I definitely needed a break. And I asked O'Melveny to give me a sabbatical to take some time off just to think through whether I wanted to stay and go for a partnership or whether I wanted to do something different. And they were so gracious to give me that time. And I think this is where sometimes the world works in ways I don't expect. And this is 2018. This was when, Bing, who's my childhood best friend, was talking to me about I'd love to bring more people together to think about ways that we can elevate the Asian Pacific community. There's a film called Crazy Rich Asians coming out. How do we do this? So it aligned well, timing wise. And I told him, I said, look, I have 6 months off to do essentially whatever it is I want to do to figure out what I want to do long term. So helped him build this and used a lot of the skills I had built over the years at O'Melveny, especially running portions of large trial teams, to help create this organization. And honestly, what made me stay is just the energy I had from meeting so many different people through this process. So many of our Gold House members outside of the legal industry as well, who are so energized about what they are doing and succeeding at it as well. And I at heart, I'm a pretty creative person, I would say. So I missed that creativity that I didn't get to use as much at the law firm. So that's what kind of drew me there. And I decided to commit myself to ensuring that this is going to have the foundation to ensure the longevity, because I felt like it was time. It was time, and there was so much energy behind it that if Bing and I didn't fully commit to this and essentially leave our jobs, get any salary for a couple of years, and just say we're gonna be at the helm of creating this momentum, I don't think it would get to where it was today. So I'm just really honored to have been given this opportunity and to have the support from the community.
I think it was really brave to take that sabbatical. It was it's almost like a first step, right? Because, let's face it, when you say something like that, when you're under consideration for partnership, it leaves people with a question in their heads, on the legal side of it. But that was the first act of bravery, is really sort of listening to yourself and trying to figure out where you were and where you wanted to be. I think that's sort of a key thing.
I think the hardest conversation, honestly, that was with my parents.
Oh, no doubt.
We were like, you went to law school, you've been working there for 7 years, and now you want to start a nonprofit? What does that mean? Do I need to send you food? Do you have enough money to live? That was the hardest conversation.
I was talking to a guy who's a founder of a big company, but he was at Stanford and he had gotten himself a fantastic job, and getting paid, programming, getting paid, over $100,000, and his family was so excited about it, and he left it to sort of become a founder, right? And his family was just, what are you doing? You left a really good paying job. This is what we're doing here, this stay on program, and all the conversations that would go back and forth to that. And, and now he's, one of the, America's billionaires, right? And so it sometimes you have to sort of buck that and sort of see what your own path is and have some faith. And it may not turn out like that. It may turn out to be something else, but it will still enrich you, I think. So, okay, Rose, so you were here You were beloved here. You were doing so well at Gibson. And then you decided to up and to leave us, which, we still have a tear in our eye, but, what exactly got you to do that? Because, I work with folks just like you every single day. And it's hard sometimes if you're so busy working on cases and stuff like that. I don't know when, there's times to have these other thoughts and really to give it enough time and space to understand whether or not it's something that you want to do or follow or, change. Take some leap of faith. So I want to know kind of what was going on with you and how you got yourself to that point.
Yeah, so I also have to echo Jeremy and say, and not just because you're on here, but I loved Gibson. I still love Gibson. I get to work out of the office sometimes as, Gold House is a pro bono client, and I'm so thrilled. It feels like coming home, actually. My best friends in LA are people who are in my summer class at Gibson. And so I always say if I still practice law, I would do it nowhere else than Gibson. But I think ultimately for me, I realized that the path of being a lawyer in and of itself wasn't what I wanted to spend my time and energy on, because mostly of what I grew up with. And so I am a child of first generation immigrants who are entrepreneurs. And so that entrepreneurship has always been in my blood. And I've always really been interested in how can I build new things that are changing people's lives. And it's that building new things piece that always really got my blood flowing. And so I remember even when I was at Gibson, I was listening to a lot of tech podcasts, and that was, the heyday of tech. And so on my drive home, that's where I would feed that kind of side interest of mine. And I think I will say I tend to jump quickly, and that I actually don't take that, the sabbatical or the more measured ways to figure out your new career. I remember I listened to a podcast with Brene Brown. She was on Oprah's Super Soul Sunday, and she was talking about her book Daring Greatly, to your point about taking leaps of faith. She talked about how it takes a lot of vulnerability to do that. And that's often what keeps us from making these jumps that we want to jump, is because it's the fear of shame, right? And how it really does take a lot of courage and bravery to do that. And I just thought about the kind of person I wanted to be and the kind of life I wanted to be. And I didn't want to be hindered by, the fear of shame. And I knew I wanted to just try this out, and that my legal degree would always be there, if I needed to come back. And so the next day I came in, and I knocked on Brenda's office, and I told her I was leaving. But I actually didn't have another job. I didn't know what I was going to do. I knew I wanted to try out tech. But I explored a few different things. And I know we don't like to talk about face plants or failures often in our community, but I thought about business school, and I applied to business school, and I didn't get in. And so I was like, okay, that path's not going to work. What else can I do? So I joined a tech startup called ClassPass at an entry level position. And that's where my parents also, had a conversation about, your salary is what you made as a bonus at Gibson. And so like, what are we doing here? But I knew that I knew that ClassPass was, I was pretty early, and that was going to be my MBA. And I jumped around to a lot of different teams. I learned the business through and through. I did everything from partnerships to leading global expansion in Asia to corporate strategy. And I knew, because, I was a hard worker, because that was my training. I knew that I could make the most of that. And then that would be how I learned, all the other aspects of business outside of the law, which I obviously, was more familiar with. So I was very lucky to be able to, wear a lot of different hats. And then, Jeremy and I left ClassPass without another job, thinking to take a sabbatical. And I had a chance catch up with Jeremy, and we were friends in law school. And he told me about Gold House. And one of the things that, someone had told me early on, if you want to build things and you want to be successful at it, go where there's momentum.
Yep.
And I knew there was a lot of momentum at Gold House, like Jeremy said. And so it wasn't a hard decision to say, yeah, let's do it. Let's jump on. And, what a great way to do something that you're really interested in and also make huge impact in the community. But I would say, Deb, like, I'm definitely a generalist. I know my title says marketing in it, but I'm definitely a generalist. And that all started with law. I mean, very few industries you're learning, I jumped from learning about steel manufacturing on one case to learning about how reality TV show work on another case, right? And so you get that skill to really issue spot and problem solve quickly. And if you want to be, in an early stage startup, if you're dealing with all types of business problems that come up, and that is the skill that I think is the most valuable and is probably my biggest value add to any company.
This thing that you talk about, like there was such momentum and there was such synergy. I got that same sense when Jeremy was answering, because, he got together with Bing and they had known each other. So there's already a trust and a comfort there, right? And a familiarity, and also knowing each other well enough to know the kinds of contributions that the person can make. And it starts something going, because what came to mind when Jeremy was talking is that I think when I look back at like careers, I see these like explosions of activity, right? Where I don't know what it is, but the universe comes together and there's just great and tremendous momentum, right? And that, either things are changing or building, or you're hitting a new area or whatever it is. And in those moments, I tell people, don't be afraid of them, dive into it, because it's when something is really happening, right? And that's when you're going to, really get the most of it. So, even though a part of you is like, oh my God, this is like crazy and insane, there's also part of it that has so much potential and so much energy to it that you really want to sort of like ride that, and then that will eventually plateau itself. And then, you float in the lake, so to speak, until it turns like into another waterfall, right? And then you go at that again. And I think finding comfort in discomfort is something that I think can be helpful, because it's not a smooth path. And, and so long as like you said, Rose, you knew at the core you had these skills, right? Jeremy knew that too, and that you could always come back to it. I think that gives you a foundation to sort of, and a license to be able to go off and to do things, that are not so linear, and not just confined to a certain path.
Deb, could I just add something onto that? I think that's, a lot of people reach out because they want to change careers. And I think one of the biggest hurdles, because I always say, what's stopping you from doing that? And one of the things I hear the most, probably the most common answer is, I don't know X. I don't know how to do this skill, or I don't know this industry. And I think to your point, we're all really high achieving, and it's often hard to do things that we don't know how to do, because there's that potential of not being good at it, or that potential of quote unquote failure. And I love what you're saying about having these skills to rely on, because that's the biggest thing, is like, do you have trust in yourself, and do you have trust in your skills and your intellect and your ability to problem solve? And I'm sure anyone who's listening to this podcast and having that training does, have that foundation.
Yeah. And I think it's what you said, though. It's when you're practicing law, you don't think about what it actually is doing to you, because you're too busy in it. Jeremy's too busy doing, trial prep and trying to get his witnesses, on board, right? But, when you take a step away and you look at it, the profession actually gives you tremendous skills, because one, it exposes you to a wide range of things. No case is, is the same as the last case, right? What I love about it is it gives you insight into how different businesses are run. So I have always found that I learn things from all my different cases, right? And it's like being a voyeur. I get to sort of open up the aperture, on something new and different. And I think what it does in the long run is it gives folks like you guys this tremendous sort of like background and comfort. You can sort of navigate through those worlds that you may not have grown up in, but that, that you're going to want to deal with as you're creating whatever it is that you guys are creating. And I can hear that from both of you too. So, all right, let's talk about some of the fun stuff. Okay, first of all, I'd be remiss if I didn't congratulate Rose on, being named for Forbes, 50, CMOs. So congratulations, on that. We're super excited for you and for you to get that recognition. Talk to us about what that moment was like, how you got the phone call, all that, all the good stuff. We've heard the hard part about having to tell your parents that you're stepping away from, real respected jobs. So, let's talk about some of the upside and the fun stuff in there.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And it's really funny. I always said that being on the Forbes 30 under 30 list was on my bucket. It was my bucket list. And so after I turned 30, I thought that the Forbes was out of the picture. And then this came across. So no, I of course sent it to my parents. They were very thrilled. They printed it out. It's framed. But one of the big things or one of my biggest takeaways from this experience was just how happy people were for me. And it's interesting. And that's one of the big things I've learned from being part of Gold House and from being in Germany in particular, is this abundance mentality, which is, something that's kind of new to me, actually, if I'm going to be honest. I think I grew up, very competitive. It was very much a scarcity mentality, especially when, you come from a first generation family. You're competing to get into the best schools, you're competing to get into the best law schools and law firms, and then for the best cases. And it was really exciting to see how the community just that I knew, or my community, came in and were just so happy for me. And honestly, like, Bang was the one who nominated me, and he's always looking out for all of us, to say, how can I celebrate you? How can I showcase you and your accomplishments? And that's just something that's been pretty new to me, but I think it's a new mentality that our community is really banding around. So that's something I'm really excited to tap more into for the future.
One thing that I love about this that you guys are doing, and it really warms my heart, is that, and I'm older than you guys, right? But I come from a generation where there was only one Asian or a few Asians, right? And it created, I think, this is my view of it, it created a little bit of a dynamic where we were competing against each other, right? Mm-hmm. And that always felt to me not great. Because it's like, why do I have to compete against the one person who looks just like me, right? And so what you guys are creating and what you guys are building is this fantastic dialogue where we're all in the room and we're all supporting each other in a great, big, visible kind of way. And I think also creating a new template and path for us as AAPIs in America, and how we're going to do this and how we're going to do it better. And I know that you say, Jeremy, that, your form of success is that one day you guys go away. I actually don't view that the same way. I'm going to put my vote in right now. I think that you morph into different kinds of things, right? But but where you're going and what you're creating is bigger than the actual things that you're delivering. And so as you're doing that, I know you guys are thoughtful and responsible, but it's like, try to take that in too, because it's a great gift for all of those who've been active in the community for so long, to be able to come together in that way. It's really beautiful, right?
Thank you, Deb. Yeah, and to echo what Rose said, I think the abundance mentality permeates not only within our community, with coalition building with other communities as well, with the Black community, Latino community, Indigenous community, et cetera. And teaching that to our partners. When you have a quote unquote multicultural marketing budget, for example, that doesn't mean you carve out 7% of that for the API titles, because that represents the population in the United States. Teaching that abundance mentality to our partners has been key, because they have to break out of that mindset and understand that we are able to collaborate, work together, and one win for us now, or one win for our partner now, could be a win for us later.
Yep, I'm going to keep that soundbite, abundance, because I think that's really sort of a whole different way to look at it. So thank you for that. Okay, so Jeremy, what's a particular thing that stands out as a point of pride for you with respect to Gold House? Bring on the fun, bring on the sexy stuff. I don't know, was it the Oscars? Was it like, being at the White House? I mean, what all the stuff, all the hard work, like how did that manifest into something that, pick one. I know there's more than one, but you know, that where you just, you know, it sort of manifested exactly what you guys have been building, and brought you guys great joy or put you guys on the map, whatever, you know.
I'll pick one, but real quickly, I would say one is also when Rose got the award. I think just knowing Rose since we were 1Ls in law school and going through the law firm process and journey together. You know, we were the 2 of maybe 10 who only focused on LA market, et cetera, from our class. So just being able to see her achieve all of that has been so wonderful to see. And then second one is really when Ki Kwan won the Oscar, and I remember, let's see, I saw Everything Everywhere All at Once, maybe October before it came out in March, and was just blown away. And I got to meet Ki later that year, as we're thinking about how to make sure this film that, you know, it's hard to explain in some ways, but we knew was remarkable, to get the general audience behind it, to get, you know, the Academy Award voters behind it, just to understand what it is and give it a chance. And Ki is such a lovely person. His background is similar to my family's. My parents were Vietnamese refugees as well and came over here in the 80s. So when he was on stage and won that Oscar, it was just a moment for me where seeing everything come together, all the hard work that we put in for the last 5 years, and for him to share that moment. And he said it on stage, like, this is not just for me, this is for everyone that looked like me. It was just riveting. And then I had the privilege of seeing him that night as well at one of the parties. And the first thing he said to me when he gave me a hug was, I did this for our community. Like, it wasn't about him, it was about for the community. And so just that moment is something I'll cherish the rest of my life.
I have to take a breath because you made me choke up. But so Ki and I actually went to the same elementary school.
Oh.
It's Castelar in the middle of Chinatown. And my mother was a student there and ultimately became the principal there. So I actually remember the story of when this young boy got plucked from this audition to do this movie. And we all ran to go see Indiana Jones because it was like the first time there was somebody, you know, from the community who was actually on the big screen, and how exciting it was because it was such a fantastic actor, even as a young, untrained child. But so to see that sort of manifest and come full circle, and also to know the journey that he'd been on, where it hadn't been easy, and there hadn't been roles, you know, it was so beautiful. And that's why I say to you, I know you and Bing want to disappear one day, you know, and this all goes away, but it's like really having that as part of the patina of what happens in the media world, that it's a permanent thing, right? Because there's lots of different steps, and that sort of was the pinnacle of seeing something through from sort of like a beginning all the way to later in his life. It's not nearly the end for him. I'm hoping we're going to see him in lots and lots of different kinds of things, but I love the spokesperson part of it because he's got that perspective, and he really represents a journey to me, right? Of what that has looked like. All right, so last question before we end today, but you know, you guys have talked about how Gold House really is committed to ensuring that AAPI voices are amplified. And I want folks to sort of think about it, because I'm hoping that we inspire younger lawyers, younger generation, younger people to really figure out ways to sort of seek that representation and that empowerment. Are there things that you guys would recommend to them, you know, to do or to seek out, or things that, you know, that you've seen that could be successful for, you know, for folks that just want to help push the cause, so to speak, and may not have that like big fundamental idea and be ready to leave, you know, their current job? What about that? Because, you know, I sort of feel like if everybody moves forward, we all move forward as a community, right? And so we want everybody to have an oar in the water here, so to speak.
Sure, I can start. I would say, Deb, I think for me, in thinking back to, say, when I was a second, third year associate at O'Melveny, not shying away from visibility was something that was difficult for me to do. And for so long, it came from a place of humility, I think, and something that my parents ingrained in me. It's like, don't flash your shiny award. You don't want to make your friends feel bad. But realizing now, many years later, that it's not about not being humble, but it's about understanding that if you're given the platform of that visibility, it's not just about you, but it's about everyone who's watching you, right? And if there are people who don't look like you, who have not had the same experiences as you, who are looking to see that on screen, in the papers, whatever it is, in a courtroom and speaking up, taking that chance when it's given to you and not being shy about it and kicking ass and doing it is important, because somebody's watching and somebody will be inspired by that.
Yeah. Rose?
Yeah, I would build off of that and say a couple of things. I mean, one is to do that for yourself, but also to support other people, right? And it's that abundance mentality that we were thinking about. But it's also just sharing your experiences. One of the most successful things that we've built are just dinners and events where people who usually don't share their really honest and vulnerable experiences come together and say that, and there's just such a strong bond that is created there, and that really leads to further co-creation of things that help the community. And so I would say kind of be honest and about, what your experience is like, showing up in your identity every day, and don't be afraid to share that with people. The second more tactical thing, because I'm, the marketer in me has to be tactical. But I would say, I think we look at these really big moments. We look at the Oscars, we look at May, and we think, oh, these are the moments where we show up for our community. But actually, I think your decisions in everyday life can support the community, right? You may not have the resources to buy out a theater or launch an award campaign for someone, but can you go to see it in the theater? Can you choose to support, small owned businesses in the restaurants that you go to and the products you buy at the store? Like, all those buying decisions matter. And we see so much that really that commercial investment, even if it's on a smaller scale, can really add up and make a difference. So I would say, think about it in terms of, just small steps to support the community. It doesn't always have to be, the biggest, grandest gesture.
Yeah, no, those are phenomenal suggestions. And, I love how now with social media that you can kind of get to market quickly, and it gives you an audience and a platform, and a way to communicate with others that doesn't have to be so scaled up. And it's quite genuine. And I have to say that because of social media, I feel like at least for me personally, I've been able to get back closer to my culture, because I can find resources now, or I see things that are available, including like grocery stores or new products that are coming out, that are of the foods that I love to eat. And now I have access to it because of that. But it's those kinds of things, I think, Rose, that you're talking about, that you can actually, push things and get to things more quickly, than having big decisions. So
yeah, and don't be afraid to share things that you love. Like, word of mouth really still matters, especially for smaller projects, and even, honestly, even bigger projects. Most recently, like Elemental. One of the big reasons it's now, I think, the highest grossing original animated film in the US in the past 5 years. But one of the big reasons is because of word of mouth. It's because people from our community went and saw it and really connected to it and told their friends about it, and their friends went to see it. So, sharing and continuing to have that conversation with your own community is really important, because you are a tastemaker in your own community. So
yes. Yeah. All right, well, I want to thank you guys both. We went a little bit long today, but I was so excited, and I had you both here, and I just had to ask all the questions that I think are were burning in our minds here on the behind the cameras side of it. So on behalf of NAPABA, I just want to thank you both. We look forward to all the great things that you're going to build and bring, and and all the paths and ways in which we're going to cross paths. And Jeremy, I love what you said about really trying to mix with other cultures, because I think that's one of the things that we try to do in the legal community, is not just segregate ourselves just among Asians, but really build out that voice. And so thank you for saying that. All right, guys, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Deb.
Thank
you for everything you do for our community as well.
My pleasure.